The Galactic Assembly had catalogued thousands of civilizations, and the pattern was always the same. Species either unified early and advanced steadily, or they destroyed themselves before ever reaching the stars. There were no exceptions. Until Earth. Commander Threx of the Zarn Collective stood in the observation chamber of his flagship, gazing down at the blue planet rotating quietly beneath him. It looked peaceful from orbit, deceptively so. White clouds drifted lazily over vast oceans. Golden lights flickered across continents as night settled over half the world. But the data told a different story. Civilization fractured into nearly 200 governing bodies, his tactical officer reported. Frequent internal conflict, high aggression index, nuclear capable, yet no unified command structure. Threx folded his arms behind his back, his tone calm, almost dismissive. So they are unstable. Yes, Commander. Good, Threx replied. Unstable species collapse quickly under pressure. He turned toward the massive holographic display hovering at the center of the room. It showed fragments of human broadcasts, news channels, social media feeds, military exercises, political arguments. Humans shouting at one another, fighting, competing. Always competing. They waste energy fighting themselves, Threx said. They have already done half our work. The officer hesitated, then added cautiously, There are anomalies, Commander. Threx didn't look away from the display. Explain. Despite internal divisions, their technological growth rate is irregular. Spikes during periods of conflict. Significant leaps following global wars. Their weapon development cycles are unusually fast. Threx gave a small, humorless chuckle. Of course they innovate during war, many species do. The officer shook his head. Not like this. They don't stabilize afterward. They continue refining their weapons even in times of relative peace. That made Threx pause just for a moment. Then he dismissed it. A primitive survival instinct, he said. Fear-driven development, it won't matter. He gestured toward the fleet outside. Thousands of Zarn warships hung silently in orbit, sleek, towering constructs of alien engineering, each capable of leveling entire cities with a single volley. Their shields shimmered faintly against the black of space, forming an impenetrable barrier. This world has no planetary shield, Threx continued. No unified defense grid, no coordinated fleet. He finally turned to face his officers. This is not a war, he said. It is an occupation. The command was given. Zarn ships descended into lower orbit, weapons systems charging with a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the hull. Targeting arrays locked onto major population centers, military installations, communication hubs. Everything was proceeding exactly as predicted. No resistance. No retaliation. Just silence. Commander, another officer spoke, confusion creeping into his voice. We are detecting global communication spikes. Panic, Threx said immediately. Expected. But the officer shook his head. Negative, patterns do not match civilian distress signals. That caught Threx's attention. He stepped closer to the display. Streams of data flooded across the screen, millions of signals, crossing borders, bypassing encryption, linking networks that had previously been isolated. Translate, Threx ordered. The system complied, filtering human languages into a single coherent feed. What appeared was not chaos. It was coordination. Military channels opening between rival nations, strategic data being shared freely, satellite networks merging, weapons systems being activated simultaneously across continents. Threx's expression hardened. This is unusual, he admitted. Then another alert cut through the room. Incoming transmission, the communications officer announced. Origin planetary surface, global broadcast, it's being sent to every ship in the fleet. Display it. The room dimmed as the holographic screen shifted. For a brief moment, there was only static. Then a human face appeared. Calm, focused, unafraid. No insignia, no identification. Just a representative of a species that, until now, had seemed completely divided. The human looked directly into the camera, as if staring straight at Threx himself. And spoke. 4 words. Clear, steady, certain. You shouldn't have come. Silence followed, not just on the screen, but across the entire ship. Threx felt something unfamiliar stir in his thoughts. Not fear, not yet, but something close to it. Commander, the tactical officer whispered, voice tight. We are detecting simultaneous activity across all major military infrastructures on the planet. Threx didn't respond immediately. He was watching the data, watching as missile silos opened across multiple continents, as submarines shifted beneath the oceans, as aircraft mobilized from hidden bases, as satellites, hundreds of them, reoriented toward the fleet. And something else, something far more unsettling. Commander, the officer said again, more urgently this time, all internal conflicts on the planet have ceased. That made Threx turn. What? Every war, every skirmish, every hostile engagement has stopped. The realization settled slowly, but when it did, it hit with terrifying clarity. This wasn't panic. This wasn't chaos. This was something else. Something planned. Something prepared. Threx looked back at the blue planet below. Moments ago it had seemed weak, divided, easy. Now, it felt like something had just woken up. And for the first time since entering orbit, Commander Threx began to wonder if the assembly had made a mistake. The first reports didn't make sense. They contradicted everything the assembly believed about fractured civilizations. Commander Threx stood rigid as streams of data flooded the command deck. Every screen told the same impossible story. Earth was no longer behaving like a divided world. It was acting as one. Confirm global ceasefire, Threx ordered, his voice sharp. Confirmed, the tactical officer replied. All recorded conflicts, military, civil, regional, have halted simultaneously. Simultaneously, Threx repeated. Yes, Commander, no delay, no resistance. It's as if a single command was issued. Threx narrowed his eyes. That's not possible, they have no central authority. The officer hesitated, not officially. That word lingered in the air. Not officially. Threx turned back to the display. Human networks that had once been isolated by politics, by language, by distrust, were now merging in real time. Data flowed freely across borders that had, until moments ago, been fiercely defended. Weapon systems were being unlocked. Strategic reserves activated. Command chains rewritten. They're sharing everything, another officer said quietly. Military protocols, classified technologies, targeting systems, there's no restriction. That violates their own security doctrines, Threx muttered. Yes, the officer replied, it does. And yet they were doing it anyway. Threx felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere of the room. His crew, trained to remain composed under any circumstance, were beginning to show signs of unease. Because this wasn't how prey behaved. Prey scattered. Prey panicked. Prey fractured further under pressure. Humans were doing the opposite. Track power signatures, Threx commanded. Already underway, the systems officer responded. We are detecting energy surges across multiple subterranean locations. Depths range from 1 to 5 kilometers beneath the surface. Subterranean, Threx echoed. Yes, Commander, facilities previously undetected by our scans. That made him step forward. Previously undetected, he repeated, slower this time. The officer nodded. They were hidden, deep, shielded. We're only seeing them now because they're activating. The holographic display shifted, highlighting dozens, then hundreds of points across the planet. Each one pulsing with rising energy. Each one coming online. What are they? Threx asked. The officer swallowed. Unknown, but their output suggests weapon systems, large scale. A silence fell over the command deck. Not the silence of confidence, but the silence of realization. They built these in secret, Threx said, more to himself than anyone else. Across multiple nations, without detection. And they never used them, the officer added. Until now. Threx clenched his jaw. This wasn't desperation. This was preparation. Long-term, deliberate, hidden. How long, he asked. We're analyzing historical data, the officer replied. Some of these structures date back decades, others longer. Longer, Threx turned sharply. Yes, Commander. There are indications that certain systems were conceptualized during their early nuclear age. Designed, abandoned, then quietly completed over time. A slow, unsettling understanding began to form. They were planning for this, Threx said. Planning for what? The officer asked. Threx didn't answer immediately, because the answer was becoming obvious. Not for internal war. Not for each other. For something else. Something bigger. Something like this. Commander, the communications officer interrupted, voice tense. We're intercepting human command signals. They're organizing into a unified structure. Display it. The screen shifted again, revealing a rapidly forming network. Nodes connecting across continents, linking military leaders, governments, private sectors, even civilian infrastructures. It was messy. Imperfect. But it was working. They're not following a single leader, the officer observed. It's decentralized, adaptive. Decisions are being made collaboratively in real time. Threx stared at the structure. It was inefficient by Zarn standards. Unpredictable. Difficult to model. Which made it dangerous. They don't need a central authority, Threx realized. They just need a common goal. And now they had one. Another alert flashed. Orbital tracking systems active across the planet, the tactical officer reported. We are being scanned from multiple angles. Frequency patterns are shifting, adapting to our countermeasures. Threx felt it then. Not fear, but the undeniable edge of something slipping out of control. They're not reacting, he said quietly. They're executing. A pause. Then the officer added almost reluctantly, Commander, we may have underestimated them. Threx's gaze hardened. No, he said. We misunderstood them. He looked down at Earth again. At the continents now alive with coordinated motion. At the oceans concealing unseen threats. At the skies filling with aircraft that no longer represented separate nations, but a single force. Prepare orbital suppression, Threx ordered. We end this before they fully mobilize. Yes, Commander. Weapon systems across the Zarn fleet surged with power, glowing brighter as they prepared to strike. But even as the command was carried out, something felt wrong. Too late. Too slow. Because below, humanity wasn't rushing. They weren't scrambling. They were moving with precision. With purpose. As if they had been waiting for this exact moment. Commander, the tactical officer said suddenly, his voice tight with urgency. All major human defense networks have come online. Threx didn't need to ask what that meant. He could see it. Every system, every weapon, every hidden facility. Activated. Aligned. Ready. And for the first time since the invasion began, the Zarn fleet was no longer the only force prepared for war. Threx exhaled slowly, his confidence beginning to fracture under the weight of reality. This is no longer an occupation, he said. No one disagreed. Below them, the planet moved as one. And above it, the Zarn fleet hovered on the edge of a mistake it could no longer undo. The first volley from Earth did not look impressive. To Zarn eyes, it was crude. Projectiles, chemical propulsion, heat signatures far too bright to be considered efficient. Missiles rose from oceans and land alike, cutting through the atmosphere in streaks of fire. Primitive. Predictable. Intercept, Commander Threx ordered calmly. Zarn defense grids responded instantly. Interceptor drones surged forward, point defense cannons ignited, and within seconds the first wave of human missiles was erased in bursts of light. The command deck relaxed slightly. Minimal threat, the tactical officer reported. Their weapons lack the velocity and shielding to breach. Wait, another officer interrupted. The holographic display shifted. More missiles. Hundreds. Then thousands. From different locations, different trajectories, different timings. They're staggering launches, the officer said, confusion creeping in. Not synchronized, but deliberate. Threx leaned forward. Why, he asked. No one answered. Because the pattern didn't match a standard attack. It matched something else. Testing. The second wave reached the fleet, and again Zarn defenses obliterated them. But not before sensors recorded everything. Trajectory variations. Detonation timing. Defense response speeds. Every engagement measured. They're mapping our systems, Threx said quietly. The realization spread across the room like a chill. Another wave followed. Then another. Each one slightly different. Each one adjusting. They're learning, the tactical officer whispered. No, Threx corrected, his voice tightening. They're refining. The display zoomed out, showing the entire planet. Launch points were multiplying. Hidden silos revealed themselves in deserts. Submerged platforms rose from oceans. Mobile launchers shifted across frozen terrain. This wasn't a desperate defense. It was a controlled experiment on a planetary scale. And the Zarn fleet was the subject. Commander, incoming high-velocity signatures, an officer called out. These are different. Threx's eyes snapped to the screen. These weren't missiles. They were smaller, faster, launched from railgun systems buried deep within Earth's surface. They're accelerating solid projectiles to extreme velocities, the officer said. Impact potential. The first strike hit. A Zarn frigate shuddered violently as a kinetic round slammed into its shield. The barrier held, but flickered. That's impossible, Threx said sharply. Their technology is adapting, the officer finished. More railgun shots followed. This time they weren't random. They targeted the exact points where shields had shown the slightest fluctuation during earlier attacks. The second strike hit the same frigate. Its shield collapsed. The third strike tore straight through its hull. The ship exploded. Silence filled the command deck. One ship lost. Out of thousands. And yet, it felt like something far larger had just broken. They found a weakness, someone said. No, Threx replied, his voice low and controlled. They created one. Because the weakness hadn't existed before. It had been forced into existence through repetition, observation, and adaptation. Another alert blared. Commander, we're detecting human aerial units breaching upper atmosphere. The display shifted again. Fighter craft, dozens, then hundreds, rose from Earth's surface. Individually, they were insignificant compared to Zarn ships. But they didn't move like independent units. They moved like a swarm. Coordinated, fluid, reactive. They're adjusting mid-flight, the flight officer reported, changing formations based on our targeting systems. How are they predicting our responses? Threx demanded. No answer came. Because the answer was becoming obvious. They weren't predicting. They were learning in real time. A fighter squadron veered suddenly, avoiding a defensive barrage before it was even fully deployed. Moments later, another squadron exploited the gap left behind. A Zarn cruiser took a direct hit. Not enough to destroy it, but enough to damage its weapons array. They're not aiming to overwhelm us, Threx said slowly. They're dismantling us. Piece by piece. System by system. The realization settled heavily over the crew. This wasn't chaos. This wasn't desperation. This was strategy. And it was evolving faster than the Zarn could respond. Commander, the intelligence officer spoke again, his voice strained. We've completed analysis of human historical data. Report. The officer hesitated just for a fraction of a second. Human technological advancement correlates directly with periods of large-scale conflict. Their greatest innovations, weaponry, communication, coordination, emerged during war. Threx didn't look away from the battle. Continue. They don't stabilize after conflict ends, the officer said. They carry it forward, improve it, prepare for the next one. A pause, as if they expected. Threx's grip tightened behind his back. "They don't expect it," he said quietly. "They rely on it." Another Zarn ship exploded on the display. Then another. Small losses. Insignificant in isolation. But growing. "Commander," the tactical officer said, urgency rising. "Their attacks are becoming more precise. They're targeting command relays, shield generators, coordination nodes." "They're going for the brain," Threx finished. And suddenly he understood. Humans didn't need superior technology. They didn't need perfect weapons. They needed time. Time to observe. Time to adapt. Time to turn a disadvantage into a weapon. And the Zarn fleet had just given them exactly that. "Prepare full orbital strike," Threx ordered sharply. "We end this now." "Yes, Commander." Energy surged through the fleet as weapons charged to maximum output. Below, Earth continued to move, not in panic but in purpose. As if it knew what was coming. As if it had already planned for it. Threx stared at the planet, a growing weight pressing against his thoughts. For the first time, he wasn't looking at a primitive world. He was looking at something far more dangerous. A species that didn't avoid war. A species that had been shaped by it. And now, a species that was finally fighting something other than itself. The Zarn fleet fired, but as the first beams of destruction descended toward Earth, something rose to meet them. The sky above Earth ignited. Zarn orbital weapons fired in perfect synchronization, beams of condensed energy lancing downward with the power to erase cities in seconds. From orbit, it looked like judgment. Final. Absolute. "Impact in 3 seconds, the tactical officer confirmed. Threx watched without blinking. This would end it. It always did. But before the beams could reach their targets, something rose. At first, it looked like light. Then shields. Not one, not unified, but thousands of localized barriers flaring to life across the planet, over cities, over military installations, over seemingly random terrain. "They have shielding," an officer gasped. "Not full-scale," another corrected. "Fragmented, uneven, but..." The first Zarn beam struck. Instead of obliteration, it fractured. The energy dispersed across overlapping defensive fields, bleeding into the atmosphere, splitting into harmless arcs of light that scattered across the sky like lightning. The command deck fell silent. "That's impossible," Threx said. But it was, because humans hadn't built one shield. They had built many. Different designs, different power sources, different frequencies. Individually, each was weak. Together, they adapted. "They're layering defenses," the systems officer reported. "Each impact is being redistributed across multiple grids. It's inefficient, but effective." Inefficient, unpredictable, impossible to model. Which made it perfect. "Adjust fire patterns," Threx snapped. "Focus on single targets, overwhelm them." The fleet responded instantly. Beams narrowed, concentrating their power on specific locations. A city, a base, a mountain range concealing something buried deep beneath it. The second strike hit harder. This time a shield collapsed. Fire reached the surface. An explosion bloomed. For a moment, just a moment, it looked like the Zarn had regained control. Then the counterattack came. Missiles surged upward again, but faster now. Smarter. They split mid-flight, adjusting trajectories in response to Zarn interception patterns. "They're compensating for our defenses," the tactical officer said. "They shouldn't be able to adapt this quickly," another added. But they were, because they had already seen how the Zarn fought. And they had learned. Railguns fired next. Not in waves. In sequences. Each shot timed to strike microseconds apart, hitting the same point on a Zarn shield before it could fully recover. The first shot weakened it. The second destabilized it. The third shattered it. A cruiser's barrier collapsed, and within seconds it was torn apart by a cascade of follow-up strikes. "Commander, we're losing vessels," the officer reported, voice tight. How many? Threx demanded. 7 confirmed, 12 damaged. Insignificant numbers. And yet they weren't slowing down. They're accelerating, the officer said. Attack frequency is increasing, coordination is improving. Threx's gaze hardened. Below, the planet was no longer reacting. It was dictating the flow of battle. Deploy counterswarm, he ordered. Zarn attack drones flooded from carrier ships. Sleek, autonomous weapons designed to overwhelm any defense through sheer precision and speed. They descended toward Earth in tight formations, targeting launch sites, shield generators, anything that could sustain the human response. For a moment it worked. Missile launches slowed. Railgun fire faltered. Several shield nodes collapsed under concentrated assault. Direct hits confirmed, the tactical officer said. We're suppressing their infrastructure. But only for a moment. Because the humans adapted again. Fighter jets intercepted the drones, not individually but in coordinated clusters. They didn't chase. They anticipated, cutting off drone paths before they fully formed, drawing them into overlapping kill zones. They're predicting drone behavior, the officer said, disbelief creeping into his voice. No, Threx said, watching carefully. They're learning it. Real time. Every movement observed. Every pattern understood. Every weakness exploited. A drone swarm veered unexpectedly, adjusting to avoid interception. Seconds later, human fighters mirrored the adjustment, cutting them off again, destroying them. They're adapting faster than the drones can recalibrate, the officer said. That shouldn't have been possible. Zarn drones process data at speeds far beyond biological limits. And yet, humans were keeping up. Because they weren't relying on one system. They were combining millions of minds. Pilots, analysts, AI systems, ground control. All feeding into a decentralized network that evolved with every second of combat. They're turning chaos into coordination, Threx murmured. Another alert flashed across the display. Commander forced signal intrusion across all channels. Before he could respond, every screen on the command deck flickered. Then changed. A map appeared. Not of Earth. Of the Zarn fleet. Every ship. Every formation. Every movement tracked. Perfectly. They shouldn't have access to this, an officer said, panic rising. But the data was there. Accurate. Precise. Unavoidable. Beneath the map, a line of human text appeared. Translated instantly. Now we know where you are. The words hung in the air like a warning. Or a promise. Threx stared at the display, something cold settling in his chest. Because this wasn't just about defense anymore. Humans weren't trying to survive. They were positioning, learning, preparing for something beyond this battle. Commander, the tactical officer said slowly. They're not just fighting us. Threx didn't answer. He was watching the fleet. Watching the way human strikes were shifting. Not random. Not desperate. Deliberate. Targeting key systems. Command nodes. Weak points. They're isolating us, the officer finished. And that's when it became clear. This wasn't a planetary defense. It was a systematic dismantling. And for the first time since the invasion began, Commander Threx realized something far more dangerous than defeat. The Zarn fleet was no longer in control of the battle. And if that continued for even a little longer, they wouldn't be able to leave at all. The shift was subtle at first. So subtle that most of the Zarn command crew didn't notice it, buried beneath the chaos of battle reports, damage alerts, and tactical recalculations. But Commander Threx saw it. Human attacks were no longer defensive. They were advancing. Commander, the tactical officer said, voice tight. Human aerial units are breaching upper orbit in increasing numbers. The display zoomed outward. Dozens of crude human spacecraft, Some retrofitted from civilian designs, others clearly experimental, pushed beyond Earth's atmosphere. By Zarn standards, they were inefficient, fragile, unrefined. And yet, they weren't turning back. They shouldn't be capable of sustained orbital combat, an officer said. Their shielding is minimal, their propulsion. Doesn't matter, Threx interrupted. Because capability wasn't the problem. Intent was. They're not trying to survive, he said quietly. They're trying to engage. The first human craft reached engagement range. Zarn defenses opened fire instantly, precise, overwhelming. Several human ships were destroyed within seconds. No evasive perfection, no flawless maneuvering. Just loss. And yet the others didn't retreat. They adjusted. The next wave came in at altered vectors, avoiding previous firing arcs. They're learning from losses, the tactical officer said, disbelief creeping in. They're improving between waves. Threx's gaze hardened. That's not strategy, he said. That's evolution. Another human strike group surged upward. This time they split before entering range, some drawing fire, others slipping through gaps in the Zarn defense grid. A small number made it through. Too few to matter. And yet enough. Explosions rippled across the hull of a Zarn destroyer as improvised payloads detonated against its surface. Minimal damage, but precise. Targeted. They're probing for structural weaknesses, the officer reported. No, Threx corrected again. They're finding them. Because the next attack didn't repeat the same pattern. It refined it. More ships. Better timing. Stronger coordination. A Zarn cruiser's external weapon array was disabled, surgically. Not destroyed. Removed from the fight. They're dismantling us, the officer whispered. Ship by ship. System by system. Threx clenched his jaw. Reinforce outer defense perimeter, he ordered. Tighten formation, deny them access to critical vessels. The fleet shifted, tightening its structure, closing gaps, strengthening its defensive network. For a moment it worked. Human losses increased. Their advances slowed. Commander, we're stabilizing, the tactical officer said. But Threx didn't relax. Because something felt off. They're pulling back, another officer noted. Indeed, the human ships that had breached orbit began retreating, falling back toward Earth. Pursue, the officer asked. Threx didn't answer immediately. He watched the movement carefully. Too clean. Too deliberate. They're not retreating, he said slowly. They're repositioning. Before anyone could question him, another alert cut through the room. Multiple new launch signatures from the surface. The display lit up. Not hundreds. Thousands. Missiles, drones, strike craft, all launching simultaneously from across the planet. But this time, they weren't targeting randomly. They were targeting the same points. Overlapping trajectories. Converging attacks. They're focusing fire, the tactical officer said. Specific vessels, command ships, coordination relays. Threx realized. The map highlighted his flagship at the center of multiple incoming vectors. They're targeting command. Not blindly. Not desperately. Deliberately. They want to cut off the head, an officer said. No, Threx replied, his voice steady despite the growing tension. They want to prove they can. Because this wasn't just about destroying a ship. It was about sending a message. Even your strongest is vulnerable. Deploy maximum defense, Threx ordered. All systems intercept everything. Zarn defenses surged to full capacity. Interceptors launched. Point defense cannons roared. Energy shields flared brighter than ever before. The first wave was destroyed. The second intercepted. The third broke through. Not entirely. Not perfectly. But enough. A cluster of high-velocity projectiles slammed into the flagship's shield, precisely at a point previously weakened by earlier engagements. The barrier flickered violently. "Shield integrity dropping," the systems officer shouted. "Stabilize it," Threx snapped. "We're trying." Another impact. Then another. Each one timed. Each one calculated. Not random. Never random. "They're stacking damage," the officer said, panic rising. "They're hitting the same point repeatedly." The shield collapsed. For just a fraction of a second. But that was enough. A final projectile pierced through the gap, striking the outer hull of the flagship. The ship shuddered. Alarms blared. Lights flickered. "Damage report," Threx demanded. "Outer hull breach on deck 17. Minimal structural loss, but..." "But what?" The officer swallowed. "They hit a command relay." Silence. Not catastrophic damage. Not fatal. But precise. Intentional. A warning. "They could have targeted something critical," the officer said. "They didn't." Threx stared at the display, something cold settling deeper within him. "They chose not to," he said. "Because they didn't need to. Not yet. This wasn't about winning immediately. This was about control. About demonstrating capability. About showing the Zarn fleet exactly how vulnerable they had become." "Commander," the tactical officer said quietly, "they're not just fighting us anymore." Threx didn't respond. He was watching the battlefield. Watching the pattern. The precision. The relentless adaptation. "They're hunting us," the officer finished. And this time, Threx didn't correct him. Because he knew it was true. For the first time in centuries, the Zarn fleet was no longer the hunter. And as another wave of human forces began to rise from Earth, it became terrifyingly clear. This was only the beginning. The Zarn fleet began to fracture. Not collapse, not yet, but fracture. Formations that had once been flawless now broke under pressure. Ships drifted out of alignment, defensive grids desynchronized, command relays strained under constant disruption. "Commander, we're losing cohesion," the tactical officer reported, his voice no longer steady. "Fleet coordination is degrading across multiple sectors." Threx didn't respond immediately. He was watching something else. Not the battle. The data. "Open all intercepted human transmissions," he ordered. The intelligence officer hesitated. "Commander, those feeds are unfiltered. They're extensive." "Do it." The display shifted. Battle data vanished, replaced by something far more unsettling. Human archives. Raw, disorganized, massive. At first, it looked like noise. Then patterns began to emerge. Footage of war. Endless war. Primitive battles fought with blades and fire. Then guns. Then machines. Then weapons capable of erasing entire cities in a single instant. The timeline stretched across centuries. Thousands of conflicts. Millions of deaths. Entire regions scarred. Threx's gaze hardened as he absorbed it. "This is their history?" he asked. "Yes, Commander," the intelligence officer replied quietly, "and this is only a fraction of it." The display shifted again. New data. World wars. Global-scale destruction. Weapons so powerful they threatened the species itself. "They came close to extinction," the officer continued, "multiple times." "By external forces?" Threx asked. A pause. Then, "No, Commander." Threx felt something tighten in his chest. "They did this to themselves." Silence filled the command deck. Because the implication was impossible. No species survived that. No species recovered from self-inflicted devastation on that scale. And yet humans had. How, Threx demanded. The officer didn't answer immediately. Because there was no single answer. "They adapt," he said finally. "After every conflict they rebuild, stronger, faster, more advanced." The display continued to scroll. Technological spikes. Massive leaps in communication, medicine, engineering, directly following periods of war. They don't just survive conflict, the officer added. They improve because of it. Threx turned back to the battle outside. Human attacks were becoming more precise, more efficient, less waste. They're doing it again, he said. Now, another data stream appeared. Military doctrines, strategic philosophies, human writings translated in real time. One phrase repeated across multiple sources. Different languages, same meaning. If you want peace, prepare for war. Threx stared at the words. They built their entire civilization around this, he said. Yes, Commander. And we, Threx exhaled slowly. We gave them exactly what they were preparing for. Another alert flashed. Commander, new human transmission detected. It's not encrypted. Display it. The screen shifted. A simple text file. No images. No video. Just words. The translation appeared instantly. You see it now, don't you? No sender. No signature. Just a statement. As if it had been meant for him. Threx felt the weight of it settle. They know we're watching, he said. They want us to understand. Understand what? The tactical officer asked. Before Threx could answer, the file changed. More text appeared. A passage pulled from human archives. We were not built for peace. We were shaped by survival. Every war, every loss, every mistake refined us. The words lingered on the screen. No one spoke. Because the meaning was clear. This wasn't a threat. It was a revelation. They're explaining themselves, the intelligence officer said. No, Threx corrected quietly. They're warning us. Another line appeared. You think war is our weakness. A pause. Then, it is the only thing we have ever truly mastered. Outside, another Zarn ship exploded. Then another. The battle was shifting faster now. Human forces moved with increasing precision, targeting vulnerabilities as soon as they appeared. They're accelerating again, the tactical officer said. Adaptation rate is increasing exponentially. How? Someone asked. Threx didn't answer right away. He was still staring at the text. At the history. At the endless cycle of destruction and improvement. They've done this before, he said finally. Countless times. But never like this, the officer replied. Never against an external threat of this scale. Exactly, Threx said. And that's what makes this worse. Because for the first time in their history, humans weren't fighting each other. They weren't divided. They weren't holding back. They're unified, Threx said. And they've brought everything they've learned with them. Another file opened automatically. This one older. Deeper in the archives. A recorded speech, fragmented, partially degraded. But the translation was clear. We learned to fight long before we learned to stand together. A pause in the recording. Then, God help whatever forces us to do both. Silence. Absolute silence. Even the battle seemed distant for a moment. Because the truth had settled in. Not just on Threx, but on everyone in the room. We did this, the tactical officer whispered. We forced them into this. Threx didn't deny it. He couldn't, because the evidence was undeniable. The Zarn fleet hadn't just attacked a primitive world. They had triggered something far worse. A species that had spent its entire existence preparing for conflict. Now united under a single purpose. Another alert shattered the silence. Commander, human fleets are no longer holding position. They're advancing. The display shifted. Human ships, more numerous now, more organized, were pushing outward. Not defending Earth. Leaving it. They're not stopping at orbit, the officer said. No, Threx replied, his voice low. They're not. because this was never just about survival. And now humanity had learned enough. Fast enough. And for the first time since the invasion began, Commander Threx felt something he had never experienced before. Not doubt, not uncertainty, but fear, because the truth was no longer hidden. And it was far worse than anything the Assembly had predicted. Humanity wasn't just capable of war. It was defined by it. And now, it finally had a reason to turn that nature outward. The Assembly had never hesitated before. Across centuries, its decisions had been absolute, calculated, precise, unquestioned. Entire civilizations had risen or fallen based on its judgment, and never once had it doubted the outcome. Until now, the reinforcement armada arrived at the edge of Earth's system in perfect formation, thousands of warships, larger and more advanced than anything the Zarn fleet had deployed. Their presence alone was meant to end the conflict. Instead, it revealed something far worse. "Report," one of the Assembly leaders demanded, its voice echoing through the command nexus. A holographic projection of the battlefield flickered to life. And then silence followed, because what they saw didn't make sense. The Zarn fleet gone. Not scattered. Not retreating. Gone. Debris fields drifted in orbit, glowing fragments of once formidable ships slowly tumbling through space. Emergency signals flickered weakly before fading into nothing. "Where is Commander Threx?" another leader asked. No answer came, because there was no signal to trace. No surviving command relay. Nothing. Impossible, a third voice whispered. The word carried something new. Uncertainty. Then the display shifted. Earth, still there. Scarred, burned, atmosphere streaked with the aftermath of orbital bombardment. Sections of the surface still glowed with residual heat. But alive. Not just alive. Active. Magnify orbital space, the first leader ordered. The image expanded. And that's when they saw them. Human ships. Hundreds, no, thousands of them. Not scattered like before. Organized. Structured. A fleet. Analysis, the leader demanded. The system complied. Human vessels exhibit hybridized technology, the report began. Design patterns indicate rapid integration of Zarn systems into existing human frameworks. How rapid? Another leader asked. A pause. Then, estimated development cycle, less than one planetary rotation. Silence, because that wasn't just fast. It was impossible. No species adapts that quickly, one of them said. But the evidence hovered in front of them. Undeniable. They're not adapting, another voice replied slowly. They're accelerating. The human fleet moved. Not randomly. Not defensively. It shifted formation with fluid precision, responding to the presence of the Assembly Armada before any command had even been issued. They've detected us, the tactical system reported. How? A leader demanded. We're outside their sensor range. They've extended it, the system replied, using modified Zarn technology. Of course they had. The realization spread like a fracture through the Assembly's confidence. Everything the Zarn had brought into this system was now being used against them. Open communication channel, the first leader ordered. We will assess their intent. The signal was sent. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a response. Not delayed. Not scrambled. Immediate. The screen shifted, revealing a human figure. Not a soldier. Not a politician. Just a representative. Calm. Focused. Unafraid. You've seen enough, the human said. No introduction. No negotiation. Just certainty. You engaged us as a divided species, the human continued. That was your first mistake. The Assembly remained silent. Listening. Your second mistake, the human paused, eyes steady, was giving us time. The words landed with weight. Because they were true. Every second of this conflict had made humanity stronger. Faster, more unified. We are prepared to negotiate, one of the assembly leaders finally said. It was the first time those words had ever been used in such a context. And everyone in the chamber knew it. The human tilted their heads slightly. Negotiate, they repeated. Not confused. Almost curious. You attacked our world, the human said. You studied us, judged us, decided we were weak. A brief pause. You were wronged. Outside, the human fleet shifted again, subtle, controlled movements that spoke of readiness. Not aggression. Not yet. But something close. What are you? One of the assembly leaders asked. It wasn't a demand. It was a question. And for the first time, it sounded like one. The human didn't answer immediately. Instead, they seemed to consider the question. Then they spoke. We are what happens when a species survives everything meant to destroy it. A pause. We are what remains when conflict becomes evolution. The words echoed in the silence. Then, we didn't choose to become this, the human added. But you, their gaze hardened just slightly, reminded us why we are. The transmission ended. Abruptly, no farewell, no terms, just silence. The assembly leaders sat motionless, because there was nothing left to misinterpret, nothing left to deny. Assessment, the first leader said quietly. The system responded without hesitation. Humanity exhibits exponential adaptive growth under conflict conditions. Current trajectory indicates continued acceleration. Projection. A pause. Then, uncontainable. The word hung in the air. Heavy. Final. Outside, the human fleet began to move again. Not retreating. Not holding position. Advancing. Slowly. Deliberately. As if testing the space between them. As if measuring the distance. And for the first time in its long history, the assembly did something it had never done before. It hesitated, because this wasn't a war they understood. This wasn't an enemy they could predict. This was something else entirely. Something they had created. And now, something they could no longer control. The order to retreat was given in silence. No debate, no resistance, no pride left to defend. The Galactic Assembly, once absolute, once unquestioned, chose withdrawal. Disengage all forward units, the lead authority commanded. Maintain distance, avoid escalation. It was the closest they had ever come to fear. Across the void, the Armada began to pull back, slowly at first, carefully maintaining formation. Shields remained active, weapons stayed charged. They expected pursuit. They prepared for it. But none came. Not immediately. Human fleet holding position, the tactical system reported. The leaders watched the display closely. Thousands of human ships remained suspended in orbit above their wounded world. Scarred, improvised, but unmistakably unified. Waiting. Why aren't they advancing? One leader asked. No one answered. Because no one knew. For the first time, humanity wasn't reacting. It was choosing. And that made it far more dangerous. Maintain retreat vector, the lead authority ordered. We will reassess beyond engagement range. The Armada turned, engines igniting in synchronized bursts of light. Distance began to grow. Slowly, carefully, every second measured, every movement deliberate. Then, signal detected, the communication system interrupted. All attention snapped back to the display. Source, the leader demanded. Unknown, the system replied. Transmission is not directed, it's drifting. Display it. The screen flickered. Static. Then audio. Broken at first. Fragmented. But stabilizing. A voice. Familiar. Commander Threx. If this is being received, then the outcome is already decided. The room froze. Source confirmed, the system said. Recovered from damaged Zarn command vessel debris. The recording continued. I miscalculated, Threx's voice said, strained but steady. Not their strength, but their nature. The static surged, then cleared. We believed their conflict made them weak. That division would ensure their collapse. A pause. We were wronged. Outside, the human fleet shifted slightly, barely noticeable but enough to draw every eye. They do not fight because they are broken, Threx continued. They fight because it is how they survive. Another pause. Longer this time. Heavier. And now they are no longer fighting each other. Silence followed. The weight of that statement settled across the assembly like gravity. We gave them unity, Threx's voice said. We gave them purpose. The recording crackled, fading in and out. If you are hearing this, then you still have a choice. The leaders leaned forward, unconsciously. For the first time, you are not facing a species that fears war. The static surged again. You are facing one that understands it. The recording faltered, then returned for one final line. And by the time you realize what that means, a long, empty hiss of interference. It will already be too late. The transmission ended. No signal followed. No recovery possible. Just silence. Outside, the distance between fleets had widened. The assembly armada continued its retreat. But something had changed. Human fleet movement detected, the tactical system said. Every leader turned back to the display. The human ships were moving. Not aggressively, not chaotically, but with purpose. They broke formation, not into disorder but into expansion. Spreading outward, repositioning, extending beyond Earth's immediate orbit. What are they doing? One leader asked. The system analyzed, then responded, establishing range. A pause, preparing for sustained deep space operations. The meaning was clear. They weren't just defending their world anymore. They were preparing to leave it. Projection, the lead authority said, voice quieter now. The system processed for a moment. Then, human expansion beyond home system, imminent. Silence followed, because there was nothing left to debate. Nothing left to interpret. This was no longer a contained conflict. This was a beginning. They will come for us, one leader said. Not as a question, as a fact. The lead authority didn't respond immediately. Instead, it watched the human fleet, spreading, organizing, evolving in real time. Then it spoke. Yes. A single word. Heavy with inevitability. Behind them, Earth burned softly in the distance. Not destroyed. Not broken. Changed. From that fire had emerged something new. Not just unity. Not just survival. But direction. Humanity had spent its entire history preparing for war, without knowing who the enemy would be. Now they did. And worse, they knew how to fight it. The assembly armada accelerated, retreating into the dark between stars. Faster now, less controlled, because distance was no longer strategy. It was desperation. Behind them, the human fleet continued to expand. Silent, relentless, unstoppable. And across the vastness of space, a realization spread, slow at first, then undeniable. The galaxy had discovered the truth. Not through study, not through observation, but through war. Humanity was not a species that avoided conflict. It was a species perfected by it. And now, it was no longer confined to one world. The stars waited, but not for long, because the moment humanity learned how to reach them, the balance of the galaxy would shatter. And by the time anyone tried to stop it, it would already be far too late.